My brother dragged me by the arm across the ballroom of Atlanta's most exclusive country club to meet his fiancée's multimillionaire father. He knocked over my glass of water in the process, not even caring as it shattered on the floor. He just wanted to humiliate me. Smirking, he shoved me forward and announced, "This is our family failure." My parents were right there nodding along and adding, "We do not brag about her." But the billionaire did not laugh. He looked at me, froze completely, and slowly lowered his drink. The color drained from his face as he bowed his head and said quietly, "So it is you. This is unexpected." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. I am Nia, 32 years old, and my entire life I have been the profound disappointment of the Washington family. Growing up in Atlanta, my parents cared about two things: their flawless reputation at our prominent church and their elite status among high society. Everything we did was a meticulously calculated performance. From the luxury cars leased just to keep up appearances to the manicured lawns of our suburban estate, our lives were completely curated for a judging audience. If you did not fit their strict mold of success, you were an absolute liability. I was their biggest liability. Tonight was my brother Marcus's crowning achievement. He was 35, a former medical student, and the undisputed golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. He was marrying Chloe Sterling, whose main personality trait was her father's immense bank account. Richard Sterling was a white real estate tycoon, a ruthless billionaire who essentially owned half the city. For my parents, marrying into the Sterling family was the ultimate social victory. It was their golden ticket to the upper echelons of a world they had desperately clawed to be part of. The rehearsal dinner was held at the most exclusive country club in the state. The ballroom dripped in old money opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over white silk linens and towering floral centerpieces. A jazz band played softly in the corner, their smooth melodies mingling with the clinking of expensive champagne flutes. I was seated at a tiny table near the kitchen swinging doors, far away from the elevated VIP section. I did not mind the isolation. I wore my simple emerald green pantsuit, sipping sparkling water and counting the painfully slow minutes until I could slip out the back door unseen. I had no desire to participate in the charade, and I knew my family preferred me hidden in the shadows anyway. But Marcus had entirely other plans. I did not see him coming until his heavy hand clamped down viciously on my shoulder. Startled, I jerked my arm and my glass of water tipped over, spilling a cold puddle across the pristine white tablecloth and splashing onto my sleeve. "Look at you making a mess as usual," Marcus sneered, his voice laced with venom. He yanked me up from my chair with enough aggressive force to make my heels stumble awkwardly on the polished marble floor. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to pull my wrist free from his tight grip. "You are going to pay your respects to Mr. Sterling," Marcus demanded, digging his fingers deeper into my skin as he dragged me forward. "You have been hiding back here all night, like a frightened stray dog. It is time you actually contributed to this family by showing some gratitude to the people funding this lavish weekend." Before I could pry his fingers off my arm, my mother suddenly materialized from the bustling crowd like a polished ghost. Beatrice wore a custom beaded gown that surely cost a small fortune. Her face was set in that terrifying artificial smile she exclusively used when she was furious, but holding an audience. She stepped directly into my path, raking her judgmental eyes over my emerald suit with visible disgust. "I specifically told you to wear the designer dress I bought you. Not this cheap rag," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "I bought my own clothes," I replied steadily, refusing to break eye contact. "You are a complete disgrace," Beatrice continued, stepping closer until her heavy floral perfume was suffocating me. "You could not even make it into my esteemed sorority. You dropped out of art school to paint graffiti in a damp basement. You have done absolutely nothing worthwhile with your life. The least you can do tonight is keep your mouth shut and not embarrass us. We are merging our legacy with a billionaire family, Nia. Do not ruin this incredible opportunity for your brother." My chest tightened with the familiar heavy ache of her lifelong rejection. The absolute truth was, she had no idea what I actually did for a living. She only knew I walked away from the prestigious law degree they aggressively forced upon me to choose art, a path they considered an embarrassing sentence to poverty. She did not know my perceived failure was actually my greatest blessing. Marcus tightened his bruising grip and pulled me past our mother. "She is coming with me," he told Beatrice over his shoulder. "I want Chloe's father to see the stark contrast. I want him to know exactly how far I have risen above the bottom feeders of this family." He dragged me forcefully toward the elevated VIP tables where the most important guests sat. Chloe stood there in a sparkling white cocktail dress, looking incredibly bored as she sipped her drink. Beside her stood Richard Sterling, a tall, imposing man with silver hair and cold, calculating eyes. He was in the middle of a serious conversation with another executive when Marcus aggressively shoved me forward. I stumbled slightly, catching my balance just inches from Richard's polished shoes. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus announced loudly, ensuring that all the surrounding tables fell completely silent. "I want to introduce you to my younger sister, Nia. She is our family failure. My parents and I usually do not mention her in public to avoid the embarrassment. She dropped out of school to finger paint in the dark, but we graciously let her attend tonight." Chloe let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed in the quiet space. "Oh, Daddy, this is the one I told you all about. She paints graffiti in her dead grandmother's extremely dirty basement. She is just a sad charity case for Marcus to look after. Do not let her ask you for a job." I stood tall, smoothing the wrinkles from my emerald suit. I did not look at the floor. I did not cry. I looked directly into Richard Sterling's cold eyes, waiting for the typical pity, or swift, arrogant dismissal, that incredibly wealthy men like him, usually reserved for invisible people like me. Instead, something truly incredible happened. Richard Sterling was holding his crystal glass of scotch. As his sharp eyes locked onto mine, his hand completely froze midair. The powerful, intimidating aura surrounding him vanished in an instant. All the color drained rapidly from his weathered face, leaving him as pale as a ghost. He completely ignored Marcus's outstretched hand and Chloe's continued laughter. Richard slowly lowered his glass, carefully setting it on the glass table with a visibly trembling hand. The sound of crystal clinking echoed sharply in the tense silence. He took a deeply respectful step back, bowed his head slightly toward me, and spoke in a quiet, unwavering voice. "So it is you," he breathed out, staring at me, as if I held his entire life and fortune in my bare hands. "This is unexpected." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop on the polished marble floor. Marcus stood with his mouth slightly open, his grip on my arm, completely slackening as his brain desperately tried to process what was happening. My mother, Beatrice, looked as though she had been physically struck. Her artificial camera-ready smile melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Richard Sterling, a man known for ruthlessly tearing apart corporate rivals before breakfast, was looking at me with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. "Mr. Sterling," Marcus stammered, trying to regain control of his carefully orchestrated humiliation. "I think there is a massive misunderstanding here. This is just Nia. She does not belong in your world." Richard did not even look at my brother. He kept his sharp, calculating eyes locked securely on mine. "There is no misunderstanding," Richard said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may know her as Nia Washington. But in my world, the world of international fine art and high-stakes global acquisitions, she is known exclusively as NW Authentication. She is the single most feared, respected, and brilliantly ruthless undercover art appraiser on the entire East Coast." A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding tables. Wealthy guests leaned in, murmuring frantically to each other. My mother took a staggering step back, her manicured hand flying to her chest as if she could not catch her breath. But Chloe Sterling, completely oblivious to the massive shift in the room's power dynamic, let out another grating, high-pitched laugh. "Daddy, what are you talking about?" she whined, tossing her expensive blonde extensions over her shoulder. "She is a total loser. Marcus told me everything about her. She just paints ugly graffiti in her dead grandmother's extremely dirty basement. She is practically homeless and just looking for a handout." Richard whipped his head around to face his daughter. His eyes blazed with a fury so intense that Chloe physically recoiled, bumping into the table behind her. "Shut your mouth, Chloe!" Richard barked, his voice cracking like a whip across the silent ballroom. "You have absolutely no idea who you are speaking to. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are deeply embarrassing me." He turned his back on his trembling daughter and faced the crowd, his commanding presence demanding their absolute attention. Last month, my corporate board was hours away from finalizing a $50 million acquisition of a newly discovered Jean-Michel Basquiat painting. It was fully vetted by my experts. It had certificates of authenticity from 3 major European auction houses. We were ready to transfer the funds to an offshore account. But NW Authentication intercepted the sale. She bypassed my entire corporate security team, walked straight into my private office, and proved in under 10 minutes that the painting was a masterful, highly sophisticated forgery tied to an international money laundering ring. She single-handedly saved my entire corporation from a $50 million loss and a massive federal indictment that would have destroyed my legacy. Richard took a deep breath, turning his intense gaze toward my parents with absolute disgust. While you people were apparently mocking her for dropping out of law school and working in a basement, she was actually working deep undercover. She spent years immersing herself in the gritty, unseen underbelly of the art world. She studied the chemical compositions of forged paint, tracked down stolen masterpieces across continents, and built a global network of elite informants. She is a self-made ghost who holds the power to make or break billionaires with a single appraisal. And you brought her here tonight to humiliate her. You are the fools. The blood drained completely from Marcus's face. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was waiting for the ground to hit him. Beatrice was visibly trembling, her eyes darting frantically around the room, watching the elite society she worshipped, suddenly looking at her with shock and utter disdain. They realized she had been relentlessly abusing a woman of immense power and wealth. Then my father decided to make his move. Thomas Washington had been quietly sipping his bourbon near the bar, watching the entire exchange unfold from a distance. Unlike my mother, who was driven purely by social climbing and appearances, my father was driven entirely by greed. He was a calculating man who could smell money from a mile away. Seeing Richard Sterling, a billionaire tycoon, bow down to his disgraced daughter, flipped a massive switch in his head. Suddenly, the father who had ignored my existence for a decade puffed out his chest and marched right into the center of the VIP section. He pushed past a paralyzed Marcus and threw a heavy, possessive arm around my shoulders. He flashed his brilliant, charismatic smile at Richard, and the crowd playing the role of the doting patriarch to absolute perfection. "Well, what can I say?" Thomas announced loudly, projecting his deep voice so everyone in the ballroom could hear him clearly. "That is my girl. I always knew she had a brilliant mind. She just needed time to find her unique path. The Washington business blood runs deep in her veins, Mr. Sterling. We are a family of winners, and Nia is the proof of our strong legacy." The sheer audacity of his performance made my stomach turn. For years, this man had looked right through me. He had refused to pay for my art supplies, told me I was a terrible investment, and mocked my life choices at every single holiday dinner. Now he wanted to claim my success as his own. He wanted to use my hard-earned reputation to elevate his own status in front of a billionaire and secure his place in this elite circle. I did not smile. I did not play along with his desperate charade. I violently shoved his heavy arm off my shoulder, stepping back to put a hard physical distance between us. The ballroom went dead silent once again, the tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. "Business blood?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, but loud enough to reach the very back of the room. "Is that what you call it, Thomas? Is that what you call it when you secretly drained my entire college savings account to pay off Marcus's fraternity gambling debts?" The charismatic smile plastered across my father's face completely collapsed. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The absolute silence in the ballroom shattered into a chaotic cacophony of gasps and furious whispering. Elite society members leaned across their white silk tables, their eyes darting between my father's horrified expression and my unwavering stare. Thomas Washington, the man who had spent his entire life projecting an image of untouchable wealth and moral superiority, looked exactly like the thief he truly was. He took a stumbling step backward, bumping into a waiter who was frozen in place. Marcus opened his mouth to defend our father, but the sheer panic in his eyes confirmed every single word I had just spoken. They thought I would stay silent forever. They thought the family secret was safely buried. That was when Chloe finally lost her mind. The reality that her perfect, highly publicized rehearsal dinner had been hijacked by her fiancé's scapegoat sister finally registered in her privileged brain. Her face flushed, an angry, blotchy red, clashing violently with her expensive dress. She stomped her heel on the marble floor, looking exactly like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum. "You are a liar!" Chloe shrieked, pointing a manicured, trembling finger directly at my face. "You are making all of this up just to ruin my weekend because you are jealous. Daddy, she is crazy. She must have manipulated your security team or hacked your corporate files. I want her out of here right now." She wildly scanned the perimeter of the room, her voice hitting a screeching pitch. "Security. Guards. Get this trash out of my dinner immediately." Richard Sterling did not move a single muscle to support his daughter. He did not signal the guards. He just watched me, his mind clearly turning gears, reevaluating everything Marcus had ever told him about the Washington family. The billionaire was realizing that he had backed the wrong horse. I did not even look at the security guards stepping hesitantly from the shadows along the walls. My eyes were entirely locked on Chloe. Specifically, my gaze was glued to the center of her plunging neckline. Pinned against the white silk of her designer dress, catching the light of the massive crystal chandeliers above, was a heavy, ornate ruby and gold vintage brooch. The air trapped itself in my lungs, and a hot flash of pure rage ignited in my chest. It was not just any piece of vintage jewelry. It was Big Mama's brooch. My late grandmother had worn that exact piece every single Sunday to church. It was her prized possession, and she had explicitly left it to me in her last will and testament. It was the only physical piece of her I had left in the world, and it had mysteriously vanished from my bedroom drawer the week before I officially moved out of my parents' house. They told me I must have lost it. I stepped right past my paralyzed father and walked directly into Chloe's personal space. My voice dropped to a lethal, icy calm that cut through her hysterical screaming. "Take off Big Mama's brooch! Now!" Chloe instinctively covered the large ruby with her hand, her eyes wide with sudden fear at my tone. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, taking a step backward until she bumped into her father's arm. "Marcus gave this to me." My mother Beatrice lunged forward, grabbing my arm with trembling, manicured fingers. "Nia, stop this instant!" She hissed, her voice vibrating with sheer panic and desperation. "I gave it to her. I gave it to Chloe as her something old for the wedding tradition. Marcus needed a significant family heirloom to prove our long-standing legacy to her family. You never wore it anyway. It was just gathering dust in a box. You do not even appreciate fine things." I slowly turned my head to look at my mother. I did not pull my arm away. I just stared at her hand until she released me, shrinking back from the look in my eyes. The absolute disgust I felt for her in that moment was suffocating. "You stole my dead grandmother's jewelry, the only thing she explicitly wanted me to have, just to play dress-up for your wealthy white in-laws," I asked, my voice echoing loudly in the dead silent room. "You stripped me of my heritage so your golden boy could pretend he came from a long line of generational wealth. You let me believe I had lost the one thing Big Mama gave me just to buy Chloe's approval." Marcus desperately stepped between Chloe and me, holding his hands up like a referee trying to stop a brawl before it turned bloody. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice stripped of all its previous arrogance. The confident golden child was gone, replaced by a terrified con artist whose house of cards was collapsing. "Do not do this here. We can talk about the jewelry, the college fund, all of it privately. Just walk away tonight. I will write you a check tomorrow for whatever you want. Please just leave." I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the pocket of my emerald suit and pulled out my phone. I ignored Marcus completely, stepping around his trembling frame, and locked my eyes back on the billionaire standing rigidly beside his daughter. I tapped my screen twice, opening a highly secured digital file I had prepared weeks ago, and turned the phone so only Richard Sterling could clearly read the bright screen. "Mr. Sterling," I said, clearly ensuring the words carried perfectly across the entire hushed ballroom. "Ask your future son-in-law what collateral he used to secure the $15 million loan you gave him for his new real estate firm." The suffocating silence returned heavier and darker than before. Thomas Washington's mouth snapped shut. The jovial, commanding patriarch act vanished instantly, replaced by the panicked, wide-eyed stare of a man caught red-handed in broad daylight. He dropped his arm from the empty air where I had just been standing and took a slow, cowardly step backward, melting into the periphery, as if trying to erase his own existence. Richard Sterling did not miss a single micro-expression. The billionaire slowly turned his head, his sharp gaze dragging away from my cowardly father and locking directly onto Marcus. The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Richard was a man who had built a global empire by systematically destroying liars, frauds, and corporate parasites. He was currently looking at my brother as if he were a diseased rat that had scurried onto a Michelin-starred dining table. If Marcus had secretly stolen his own sister's college fund to cover illicit gambling debts, what else had he stolen? Marcus was actively disintegrating under the billionaire's scrutiny. Heavy, rolling beads of sweat broke out across his forehead, shining slickly under the glare of the crystal chandeliers. His expensive, custom-tailored tuxedo suddenly looked too big for him, hanging off his shoulders like a cheap costume. Panic seized his features. He darted forward, grabbing Chloe by the wrist with a frantic, uncoordinated motion that made her stumble in her designer heels. "We are leaving," Marcus stammered, his voice jumping a full octave as he tried to physically drag his bewildered fiancée toward the grand mahogany exit doors. "Chloe, come with me right now. We are going upstairs. My sister is having a complete mental breakdown. She is delusional. She is sick. We do not need to stand here and listen to this insane garbage." Chloe dug her expensive heels into the polished marble floor, violently yanking her arm out of his frantic grasp. The reality that her perfect, highly publicized rehearsal dinner was rapidly turning into a spectacular crime scene was finally registering. "Let go of me, Marcus. You are hurting my wrist," she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the tables. "What is she talking about, Daddy? Do something, he is hurting me." Richard did not signal his guards to help his daughter. He handled it himself. He stepped directly into Marcus's path, blocking the exit like a solid wall of pure intimidation. He did not yell. He did not have to. He simply projected an aura of absolute terrifying authority that rooted Marcus to the spot. "You are not going anywhere, Marcus," Richard said, his voice dangerously soft, carrying a lethal edge that sent a shiver down the spines of the guests standing nearby. "You are going to stand exactly where you are. And you are going to answer her question right here in front of me and in front of everyone you invited to this room." Cornered, publicly humiliated, and facing the wrath of a billionaire, Marcus resorted to the only defense mechanism he had ever known. He fell back on the toxic, unyielding entitlement our parents had spoon-fed him since the day he was born. He puffed out his chest, attempting to physically loom over the situation to assert his crumbling dominance. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger at me, his face twisting into an ugly, defensive sneer. "I am the eldest son of the Washington family," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking frantically as he tried to project power. "I did what I had to do for the financial legacy of this family. I used the ancestral estate to secure my business. That land in Georgia has been in our name for 4 generations. It is mine by right. I am the male heir." Beatrice, sensing her golden child slipping away, immediately rushed forward, nodding vigorously in agreement with his absurd confession. "He is the firstborn son, Mr. Sterling," she cried out, looking desperately at Richard, begging him to understand their twisted logic. "It is his birthright to use family resources to build his empire. Nia is just a girl. She was going to waste that college money on art degrees and useless, unprofitable hobbies. Marcus needed that capital for real business. It was for the good of the family name. Their blatant, shameless justification of theft was so deeply repulsive that I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. It was a cold, piercing sound that cut right through their pathetic, patriarchal excuses. That laugh snapped the very last remaining thread of Marcus's sanity. The realization that I was utterly unafraid of him, that his lifelong intimidation tactics no longer worked, sent him into a blind rage. His eyes went wide and feral. He lunged across the open space between us, raising his hand high, fully intending to strike me across the face and physically silence the woman who was dismantling his entire fraudulent existence. "Shut your mouth, you worthless little—" He never finished the sentence. Before Marcus could get within 3 feet of me, 2 massive men in tailored black suits materialized seemingly out of thin air. Richard Sterling's private security detail moved with brutal, lethal precision. One guard grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his custom tuxedo, lifting his polished shoes slightly off the floor, while the other shoved his chest backward with tremendous force. Marcus flew backward, completely airborne for a split second before crashing hard into a nearby VIP cocktail table. Silver trays, crystal champagne flutes, and massive floral arrangements shattered across the marble floor in a deafening crash as he collapsed into a pathetic groaning heap of ruined silk and spilled liquor. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply looked down at my brother thrashing amidst the broken glass and spilled champagne, then calmly turned my attention back to the billionaire standing beside me. I reached into the inner pocket of my emerald suit jacket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen, opening a highly secured encrypted digital file I had meticulously prepared for this exact moment. I turned the bright screen outward, holding it up so Richard Sterling could clearly read the official government seal, the timestamp, and the bold black text of the digital property deed. I smiled warmly at the furious billionaire delivering the final devastating blow. "He used Big Mama's estate, yes," I said, my voice ringing cleanly through the groans of my brother and the horrified gasps of the wedding guests. "But unfortunately for you, Mr. Sterling Marcus does not own a single inch of that land. I do. And he forged my signature on your federal loan documents to secure that $15 million loan you gave him." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. I was standing on the balcony savoring the crisp morning air and a perfectly brewed cup of black coffee. The chaotic fallout of the rehearsal dinner still buzzed in my phone, which I had left silenced on the kitchen island. Richard Sterling had immediately frozen Marcus's assets, pending a brutal corporate investigation, and the wedding was hanging by a precarious thread. A sharp, aggressive pounding on my hotel room door shattered the morning peace. I did not rush. I took another sip of my coffee, tightened the belt of my silk robe, and walked casually to the entryway. I swung the heavy oak door open to find my mother Beatrice standing in the hallway. Her usually flawless hair was slightly frizzy, and the heavy bags under her eyes betrayed a completely sleepless night. But she was not alone. Standing right beside her, clutching a worn leather Bible and looking profoundly uncomfortable, was Reverend Jenkins from our family church in Atlanta. This was a calculated ambush. "Nia, we need to come inside right now," Beatrice demanded, her voice tight with suppressed panic. She pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, dragging the bewildered pastor into my private suite. Reverend Jenkins offered a weak, apologetic smile. "Good morning, Nia. Your mother called me in the middle of the night. She is in deep distress. We came here to pray together and find a path of healing for this family." I closed the door, slowly leaning against the frame. "I am not interested in a prayer circle, Reverend. I am interested in knowing why my mother dragged you out of bed on the morning of my brother's wedding." Beatrice slammed her designer handbag onto my glass coffee table. She unzipped it with frantic, jerky movements and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She shoved them onto the glass surface, tapping the top page with a trembling, manicured finger. "You are going to sign this retroactive deed transfer?" Beatrice ordered, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. "You are going to sign it right now and date it for 2 years ago. Reverend Jenkins is here to witness the signature and notarize it as a trusted community leader. If you sign this, it legally proves that Marcus had your full permission to use the Georgia estate as collateral. It turns a federal forgery charge into a simple family misunderstanding." Reverend Jenkins nodded solemnly, clasping his hands tightly together. "Nia, the Bible teaches us about grace and forgiveness. Marcus made a grave error in judgment, but sending your own flesh and blood to federal prison is a burden your soul should not carry. Think of your parents. Think of the shame this will bring to the Washington name. We must protect the family." I stared at the pastor, feeling a cold, heavy wave of absolute disgust. They were actually using a man of faith to guilt-trip me into committing federal perjury to cover up a multi-million-dollar fraud. I walked over to the coffee table, glancing down at the immaculate stack of papers. I did not pick them up. I looked back at my mother, who was vibrating with sheer desperation. "Why did he do it?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "Why did Marcus need $15 million so badly that he would risk federal prison? You and Dad have been bragging for years about his massive real estate empire. You told everyone he was a self-made millionaire. The pristine, perfect church lady facade that Beatrice had meticulously maintained for my entire life instantly fractured into a million jagged pieces. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. She slammed both hands down on the glass table, leaning over the unsigned papers with wild, bloodshot eyes. "Because there is no empire!" Beatrice screamed, her voice echoing violently off the penthouse walls. "The veneer of generational wealth we built is completely hollow. Big Mama let that house go into tax foreclosure 5 years ago. She was broke. She could not afford the property taxes, and she refused to ask for our help. When she died, the city was weeks away from seizing the land. Marcus just took the tax money to survive. He had to leverage the estate to keep his shell companies afloat. We had to maintain our image. If the country club found out we were bankrupt, we would be ruined socially and financially." Reverend Jenkins took a horrified step backward, clutching his Bible to his chest, as if to shield himself from the sudden, unapologetic onslaught of confessed financial crimes. He looked at Beatrice like he did not even recognize the woman who sat in his front pew every single Sunday. "You let me believe my grandmother left me absolutely nothing," I said, the bitter reality settling heavily into my bones. "You let me believe she died penniless and forgot about me, all while Marcus was using her stolen land to fund his fake luxury lifestyle and impress Chloe Sterling and her billionaire father. It is a rotting house on a useless plot of dirt!" Beatrice shrieked, tears of sheer panic finally spilling down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "It means nothing compared to what Marcus is trying to build. You are going to destroy this entire family's legacy over a rotting house," signed the papers, Nia. "Save your brother. Save us." I stood in absolute silence, absorbing the pathetic reality of my family's existence. They were not elite. They were not royalty. They were drowning in debt and lies, and they fully expected me to become their sacrificial life raft. I picked up my coffee mug from the kitchen island. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the bitter, dark roast wash over my tongue. I walked back to the coffee table and set the mug down directly on top of the retroactive deed transfer, leaving a dark, wet ring right over the signature line. "I will not be signing anything, Mother." Beatrice let out a strangled, desperate sob, reaching out to grab my shoulders, but I took a sharp step back.